morning from Luke chapter 18. I thought about all those who have given up wealth, homes, family to follow God. And I thought about how apprehensive I personally was when we began the work here at 2nd Street. And yet, this has been one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in my life. And to have you all as a part of that life has been a blessing. We've had so many wonderful people in the few years that we've been here, and it has just been a wonderful experience, especially when you take into account all of the apprehension and all of the questions that came about when we were, is this something we want to do? Is this something God wants us to do? And it has been a wonderful thing. With that in mind, Don has requested a lesson. His lesson topic was actually the Quran versus the Bible. Okay? But I felt I needed to lay a little bit of groundwork, a little bit of history before we do that lesson. So this is going to be probably a 2 or 3 part series. I'll try to keep it short. I don't like series that drag on for months and months. But Islam is something that I think we as Christians know very little about. And we even ask ourselves why we would even want to consider studying the Islamic religion on a Sunday morning when we're here to worship God. And hopefully I can make some sense of this. Personally, I have found that having a basic knowledge and understanding of what another person believes is a base, a beginning point, where I can relate to that person or can communicate with them in a way in which they need communicated with. It helps when we're opening dialogue and we're opening discussion. It helps to have a basic knowledge and background of the individual. In fact, the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, something that I think relates to this idea here. If you'll turn there with me, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and I want to look specifically at verse 22. And I think that when we study with somebody, if we have a baseline to begin with, if we understand whether it is someone of a different fraction of Christianity than what we are, if we're studying the Bible, it helps us to have a basis for that understanding of where they're coming from. And I think in Islam, it is the same way. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and in specifically verse 22, but I want you to notice with me verse 19. Begin in verse 19. Paul says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more." Paul, in this paragraph, in the context, is speaking specifically of evangelism, helping to communicate others the gospel of Jesus Christ. So Paul says in verse 20, "To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law." So Paul acknowledges he was not under the law of Moses, but he became as if he were under the law of Moses. He says that I might win those under the law. In verse 21, "To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law." So in other words, to the pagan, Paul became, or he acknowledged, not the law of Christ, or not the law of Moses. He says, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ. Paul never left his Christian faith to become something that he was not. However, what Paul did, he says, in verse 22, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. In other words, Paul is trying, he has tried his best in his evangelistic life to live in a way in which connects with those. He wants to be able to relate, to identify with those who do not have Christ in their lives. And so to the Jews, he became as one. He understood things from a Jewish perspective. To the pagan religions, he became as a pagan, beginning where they began and leading them to Christ. He has become all things to all people. And so I think it would behoove us not to simply say, I want nothing whatsoever to do with Islam. It would behoove us to have a basic understanding so that when and if, and I have known Islamic people, we have very few in this area, but it would behoove us to have a basic knowledge and understanding of what they believe. And in order to do that, we have to look at the history of Islam, some facts. Before I begin going into detail here, I want to say that I am a novice. I know very little. What I have studied about Islam comes from what I've read. I've only known one family that is Muslim in my lifetime on any personal level. So what I have comes basically from research that I've done. Take it for what it's worth. Yet there is a ton more research that I feel like I need to do in order to be effective in this, but I've done a little bit of basic research, and that is what I'm going to present to you this morning. And if we look at the origins of Islam, I find it interesting that it is one of the more modern, if you will. If we look at Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in my mind, those are the three major world religions. Although I don't think Judaism is anywhere close to a major world religion. But since Islam is closely connected to Christianity, more closely than they would like to admit, and Judaism is closely connected to Christianity, in my mind, those are a big three. However, what I find ironic is, and I think several years ago, Time magazine ran an article in which, on Abraham, it said the father of three religions was the heading of the article in Time magazine. And basically, we look as Christians, we call Abraham our father in faith. The Hebrew writer refers to Abraham. Let's go back here in Hebrews chapter 11 for a moment. I did not include this on the slide, but Hebrews chapter 11, we look at Abraham in verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And then the Hebrew writer goes into Isaac. Interestingly enough, most Muslims are direct descendants of Abraham, but they also consider Abraham to be their father in faith, just as the Jewish people believe Abraham is their father in faith, just as Christianity, though most of us do not trace our lineage back to Abraham, as Jews and Muslims, we believe Abraham is the father in faith. Islam began in 622 AD. Okay, now I find that very interesting because that makes it, out of those three religions, Islam is the newest. Islam is the second largest religion in the world if you take those who are self-proclaimed, and that's all we can do. If someone claims to be a follower of Islam, it makes it the second largest religion in the world, with over 1.5 billion people who, and I will say, self-identify as Muslim. All right, that's 22% of the world's population, if I've got that correct. Okay, 22% of the world, that is almost a quarter of the world's population identify as Muslim. Now, for comparison, 2.1 billion people self-identify as Christians. This would include all major denominations, as well as minor denominations from Catholic clear down to Amish. These folks all identify as Christians. Now that makes up 31% of the world's population, if my numbers and research is correct. Take it for what it's worth. So we might look at that number, we might say, wow, that's a pretty large gap. However, bear with me in this fact. Islam is the fastest growing religion worldwide, and its current rate of growth is at 2.9%. I honestly believe, and in a discussion several years ago with Brother John Eaton down at Belleville, West Virginia, and John Eaton, and I believe this to be accurate, but John Eaton believes that Islam, the Muslim religion, is probably going to be the dominant world religion in a short amount of time. And if you look at a growth of 2.9%, I think we're probably pretty accurate on that, given that Christianity worldwide is basically at a stagnant point. And I believe that we will soon see that in digression. I think we will see Christianity reach a digression probably within my lifetime. So a little bit of background and history on how Islam was founded. It was founded by a man by the name of Muhammad. I don't know if this picture is accurate. It's simply a Google picture of Muhammad. Take it again for what it's worth, as accurate as the internet might be. He was born in 570 A.D. in Mecca, a small town or city in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this is the guy who came up with the idea of Islam. In 1610, at the age of 40, Muhammad claimed to receive a revelation from the angel Gabriel. Now, we read about Gabriel. The Bible has Gabriel in there, and so what this leads me to conclude, a couple of different things. But main conclusion that I have is that Muhammad had some basis, some exposure to either Judaism or Christianity. Probably at this time period, Christianity. Now, the village of Mecca in which he was born and raised did not have Jewish or Christianity population to speak of, okay? You look at the history, there was almost nothing there. It was a formulation of a pagan religion that had multiple gods, very much like what we read about Athens, Greece in the Bible. And Mars Hill, where Paul is standing on there, he's observed all these altars to the unknown God, to other gods, God for this, God for that, God for something else. That was the culture, the primary culture in which Muhammad was born and raised. However, Muhammad believed that there was one God. On that level, we can relate. Okay? He believed in one God, creator of the world. I believe that he had some exposure. I think it's a conclusion that is reasonable to make, that Muhammad had some exposure either to Christianity or to Judaism, in order to reach this conclusion that he had had a revelation from the angel Gabriel. Muhammad claimed that the revelations continued from the age of 40 until the age of 62, when he died in 632 AD. Okay? Now, these revelations, as Muhammad recorded them, have been written down and compiled and make up what is known as the Quran today. So if you pick up a Quran, and I am planning to order one because I do want to do a side-by-side comparison. I can look them up online, but I'm still a paper and pen person. But what I want to do is I want to do a comparison, and for this mini-series we may end up doing them on the internet, but I want to compare the Quran to the Bible, so we can do a side-by-side comparison, and we can evaluate for ourselves what is truth. Because Jesus in John chapter 8, let's go there for a moment. The Gospel of John chapter 8, Jesus makes a very simple statement about truth. The Gospel of John chapter 8 and down right around verse 31 is where I'd like to begin. So Jesus said to the Jews who believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That is the goal behind this lesson, is for us to know the truth. And we want to compare what we believe with what someone else believes. We want to evaluate it, and we want to hold it up to the standard of truth. We want to compare it and understand as much as we can. I believe by doing that, we will strengthen our own personal Christian faith. After Muhammad began to receive these visions, as he claimed to have, in AD 10, I believe it was about 8 years, if my memory is correct in my research, about 8 years, he had been preaching his visions, and he met with a huge resistance, and which ended in persecution from his fellow citizens of the city of Mecca in modern-day Saudi Arabia. Muhammad, because of this persecution, moved to Medina, which Medina was really where he got his foothold. But before he got his foothold, he made an observation. Medina had a large Jewish population in that city. It also had a much smaller but notable number of Christians living in the city. Now, in order to appeal to these, because he'd had so little success with religions, in his effort to appeal to the Jews, that Muhammad claimed to be a prophet, like the prophet I believe he was claiming to be was Elijah. He was claiming to be like the Old Testament prophet Elijah. And Muhammad incorporated a number of Jewish traditions into Islam. We looked at this a while back, and we made notes of a couple of them. One of those was praying towards Jerusalem. Now, I didn't realize this, but Muslims no longer pray towards Jerusalem. But nevertheless, Muhammad introduced that idea originally into Islam, to pray towards Jerusalem, after being largely rejected by the Jewish population and Jewish leaders as a false prophet. He then changed the Quran, changed his writings. This is another way in which I think we can make note of when something is true, it doesn't change, does it? However, Muhammad changed his writings and instructed his followers to then pray towards Mecca, the place of his birth. Okay? Keep that in mind as well. Medina became the first Islamic state. The Islamic faith took over the leadership of the city of Medina, conquering that area, and they made the state religion Islam. Okay? This is where it takes hold at in 1622, or 622, I think. So he's been in 8 years in Medina. This is a bloody religion. And I think this is where Christianity and Islam vary greatly. This is a major dividing point. Islam became so powerful that Muhammad led his followers to war against his home city of Mecca, conquering it and claiming it for Allah. Allah was the name for who Muhammad claimed was God. Now Islam continued this trend, this lust for power. And Islam continued to grow through the power of the sword, conquering cities, conquering nations. Even after Muhammad's death, this was a trend. When he died in 632 AD, Islam continued with that mode of operation and continues today. At one point, Islam even controlled Jerusalem. And it's led to many bloodbaths between Jews and Muslims, and even between Christians and Muslims. After the Muslims conquered any city, or country, they would give the inhabitants of that country 3 options. Number 1, convert to Islam. That was their goal, that was their objective. Number 2, pay non-Muslim tax. Okay, and number 3, die. Those were the options. Christians, Jews, other religions had limited ability. They were a second-class citizen with very few, if any, rights. Okay? Again, I want you to see this as kind of a historical perspective on this religion. The basic beliefs of Islam are perhaps the best expressed in what is known as their 5 pillars of Islam. Now, you'll notice some of these 5 pillars of Islam are not necessarily bad or negative in nature, but I do want us to understand their belief system. And something that I think is interesting, and I may have it pointed out in here in a different place, something I think is interesting is the Islamic faith. Muslims do not believe that they will attain heaven by being Muslim. Okay? Being Muslim is not enough to acquire heaven. In order to acquire heaven, that you are required to go through all 5 of these pillars of Islam in order to earn your salvation. The first of these 5 pillars is the creed, or I'm going to mispronounce this word, shahada. All Muslims are to recite the shahada passionately and publicly, and that creed is, and I quote, this has been of course translated into English, there is no other God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Okay? That's their creed. That's what they believe. That is the basis of faith, and they have to announce it publicly. Now, it is my synopsis, my understanding, that perhaps Muhammad got this from the idea that through the mouth confession is made unto salvation. We as Christians confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. We require that confession in order to baptize someone, usually requiring them to state publicly that they believe. I remember when I was baptized, I was asked to repeat after an elderly man that I believed that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And so I think that this, again, was borrowed. You will find as we go through this series, you will find that Muhammad is a borrower. He has very few original thoughts, but rather he borrows them and adapts them. The same thing was said about Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, it said, when you go to visit Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia, I love it. I recommend everybody to go and visit that at some point if you have opportunity. But one of the things as we were walking through Monticello, we made an observation that there were a lot of gadgets in Monticello. And Jefferson even has a writing desk in which he grasps the pen and writes, and a copy is made over here. The pens are connected. And I found that to be so interesting and fascinating. Also, there are several elevators and dumbwaiters throughout the house that and one of the people on the tour with me when I was down there commented on Jefferson's inventive nature. And our tour guide said, folks, Jefferson was not an inventor. He was an adapter. He took someone else's invention and adapted it to his needs or lifestyle. I believe that fits Muhammad very well. I believe Muhammad was an adapter. He took others' ideas and inventions, writings, and adapted them to his desires and needs. And I think this creed is basically that. A note to be made here is that, again, this is where it's at. A Muslim does not get to heaven by being Muslim, but one must do, and I quote from the Quran, good works outlined in the 4 pillars of Islam in order to obtain salvation. The second pillar of faith is this: a Muslim must pray 5 times each day for the duration of your life. 5 times each day, and it was changed from towards Jerusalem to towards Mecca. Hence, when we've seen Muslims pray in Mass, they are facing to the east. But their mind is focused on Mecca and not Jerusalem. Prayer times, the first prayer time is after the first light, and I have on the screen the Islamic name for that time of day. The second time is between the sun reaching its height and mid-afternoon. Third time between mid-afternoon and sunset. The fourth time after sun has finished setting. And fifth is in the dark of night. These are specific times that are set based on their way of telling time. Third pillar of faith is Muslims must give 2.5% of their entire estate to the mosque or their church every year. 2.5% of everything you own goes to the mosque every year. No wonder if the Islam religion is a very wealthy religion and a very powerful religion. You think of what we own, 2.5% every year is a large sum of money. And again, I believe this is somewhat based upon the Jewish tradition of tithing. Again, a borrowed idea. The fourth pillar of faith is fasting, which occurs in the middle of Ramadan. I think we're familiar enough with television and the news media to know a little bit of basic information about Ramadan. Usually I hear it and I dismiss it, but I know usually terrorist codes, alerts go up during Ramadan. During this time period, Muslims must go without food, water, or sex from sun up until sun down. That's what they consider fasting. So that's certainly something an interesting perspective. Again, I believe this is borrowed from Judaism, at least in some form, and adapted to the Islamic religion. Muslims must visit Mecca at least once in their lifetime. This is the final act or pillar of faith of Islam. They believe the necessity to visit the birthplace of Muhammad at least once in their lifetime. Now, I want to bring this lesson back to Jesus. This has been a lot of focus away from Christ. And I want to bring this lesson as we wrap it up and bring it to a close. I want to bring this back to Jesus. There's a number of things wrong with the Islamic religion, but the number one thing that I want us to grasp this morning is the claim of Muhammad's revelation. If we look at what the Apostle Paul warned 610 years, or somewhere close to 600 years before Muhammad established religion, Paul wrote in Galatians chapter 1 and in verse 8 and 9. If you'll go there with me in your Bibles, you can read for yourself the warning of the Apostle Paul. Galatians chapter 1 and in verse 8. The Apostle Paul writes, But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed. Paul says, For am I now seeking the approval of man or God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be the servant of Christ. Paul warns not once, but twice. Every time the Bible wants to emphasize a point, and there are very few times that God repeats himself in the words of his prophets and apostles. This is one of those places where God repeats himself. He warns twice if anyone teaches anything else. In fact, he even mentions an angel from heaven. I find it ironic. So ironic that 600 years before, Paul warned that those might receive revelation from angels, contrary to the Word of God. You know, Islam recognizes that Jesus is real. And I quote from the Quran, the Messiah, Jesus, Son of Mary, was no more than a messenger before whom many messengers have passed away. And his mother adhered wholly to truthfulness, and they both ate food as do other mortals. The bottom line of what the Quran is saying and what Muhammad is saying is that Jesus Christ was a human being. We acknowledge that. Our belief believes that Jesus was both human and divine. Islam denies the divine nature of Jesus Christ. This passage is their foundation that Jesus Christ was no more than a mere mortal human being. We know that Jesus Christ is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. We believe that. We believe that Jesus Christ is God, that he became a human being, came to earth, died on the cross for our sins. There's another reason that Islam and Christianity are incompatible, is their faith in Jesus, their belief in who he was, varies different from ours. This is my faith. Allow me a time to share with you just a few passages from the Scriptures. I feel like we've not really covered a lot of Scripture today. Let me share with you what I believe from the pages of the Word of God. Revelations chapter 19. Notice with me, if you will, verse 13 and 16. Revelation 19, verse 13. The Apostle John writes by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and he says, "He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God." Drop down to verse 16, same chapter. On his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. John is writing about Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Now if we go back to the Gospel of John, chapter 18 and verse 36. The Gospel of John, chapter 18, and in verse 36 of that chapter, we see here, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." I want you to make notice of what Jesus says. Two things I want to draw from this. First, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is King. Number two, Jesus said if his kingdom were this world, if it were physical in nature, his subjects, his followers would be fighting on his behalf. Friends, Christianity is a faith of peace. Islam is a faith of war. There's a vast difference, and I think we'll see that difference in the coming studies. Christianity is a faith of peace. Let's go back for a moment into our Old Testaments, into the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9, and when you get there, we'll begin in verse 6. Isaiah chapter 9, and in verse 6 of that chapter, Isaiah writes for us, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end." I believe that Isaiah is prophesying the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Of his kingdom there will be no end. If we look back, one last passage for thought today comes from the Apostle Paul's pen through inspiration of the Holy Spirit in Ephesians chapter 1 and in verse 20, the Apostle Paul writes that, let's actually back up to verse 19. And what is the immeasurable greatness of his power towards us who believe, according to the working of his great might, that he worked in Christ Jesus when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he has put all things under his feet and given him to be head over all things to the church, which is his body, the fullness of him who fills all in all. He's speaking, my friends, of Jesus Christ, the fullness of all in all. If you'll take out your songbooks this morning, the song that has been selected is I'll Be a Friend to Jesus. I dare say that Jesus is looking for those who believe in him, who trust in his word, who are seeking a better life, a life free from sin, a life of peace. Peace between each other and peace between God. If you are not a child of God, I would encourage you to come and make your wants and wishes known, how we can assist you, as together we sing.